You are listening to the Night and Day podcast, featuring the interview archives of Western New York music writer Thom Jennings. Thom has interviewed some of the biggest names in music and entertainment, and now you can enjoy these never-before-heard interviews. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Welcome to another edition of the Night and Day podcast. It's Thom Jennings, your host, and this will be our first episode of the new year, 2020, and we'll present a interesting interview, at least I think, with legendary guitarist Steve Hackett. Now, if you're not familiar with Steve Hackett, well, that kind of surprises me because I can't see any other reason why you would tune into this particular episode. But Steve was the guitarist of Genesis from 1971 to 1977, really the beginning of their most prolific and probably, I would say, on some level, critically acclaimed period that included, you know, the Peter Gabriel era classic Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And after Hackett left, I mean, the band began to kind of move into a more pop direction, and Daryl Stuermer came in and handled the live guitar duties, and Mike Rutherford took over the studio guitar duties. And, you know, Rutherford's a serviceable guitarist, but he's certainly not up to the level of a guy like Steve Hackett. That was probably part of the reason that they brought Stuermer in to play some of the live stuff that, you know, Rutherford wasn't necessarily as good at. And of course, Stuermer played bass on some of the live stuff too as well. But anyhow, this particular episode's about Steve Hackett. Steve was coming to town for a concert at the Riviera Theater in North Tonawanda, as we will discuss. We'll talk about some of his early recordings, his early solo recordings, his days in Genesis, and I think probably the thing that will be of most interest to fans is his discussion of when he thought it would be a good idea to have Phil Collins take over as lead vocalist of Genesis. So, with that being said, hope you enjoy this one. Again, always happy to see comments in the, you know, Apple iTunes or anything like that. I don't think I have any yet, so if you wouldn't mind taking the time to put something up. But if you enjoy these things, please feel free to reach out to me. The contact information should be in the show notes for you. And here it is.
Hey, yeah, it is, Thom. Steve, what an honor to speak with you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, fine. Very good.
I appreciate you setting up this interview today. I know it looks like you're over in the UK, or at least that's where you're
calling from. That's right. I'm in the UK. Just finished recording. Yeah.
Oh, cool. What were you just working on?
Working on some new stuff. Working on new stuff. I keep it coming, if you know what I mean.
I followed your career, so I know what you mean. You certainly have been very prolific in as far as having that nice balance between revisiting your past and still putting out new material. So it must be very exciting for you to keep doing the new stuff.
It is very exciting, yeah. And you've got Independence Day there, haven't you?
We do, yes. Yep. Yeah, we got fireworks tonight and everything, so I know you guys...
Yeah, fireworks, that's good, because Roger King, who I was working with a few seconds ago, he said, it's Independence Day there. I'm surprised they're working. So he thought that was national holiday for you guys.
It is, but it's not every day I get an opportunity to interview Steve Hackett. So when I saw the date, I said, absolutely. You know, what better guy to talk to than
workaholics?
Yeah, what better guy to talk to on July 4th than a British guy, right?
Yeah.
Well, listen, if we could, I'll try to keep this about 15, 20 minutes, if that's cool.
Sure thing. Okay.
And then we'll start with, you're coming out to North Tonawanda, the Riviera Theater, and I know you've been there before. I've seen you there before, and I've actually, first time I saw you was back in 81, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. So this tour, we could start with Selling England by the Pound. You know, obviously a very important album in your career and certainly with your time with Genesis, but why now? Why this particular album? And I've read that it's your favorite Genesis recording, and I'm wondering if that's true as well.
Yeah, I've been doing Genesis Revisited for a while and cherry picking across in favorite tracks from various albums, but I got got to the point where I thought, what if I went for the whole of, well, 2 albums I was thinking of, one was Selling England by the Pound and the other one was Spectral Mornings because that was having its 40th anniversary. Let me go back to Selling England. I've never done an entire Genesis album, and neither did Genesis back in the day. We didn't do entire albums apart from Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. So I thought this was a good time to have a go at the whole of Selling England, and also include one more track that Peter Gabriel wrote for the album, which didn't make it onto the record back in the day, but it was something that ended up being a co-write between the two of us some years later, finishing it off. So I do that. I include this extra track like a deleted scene or a little bit like a director's cut to invite people into the full picture of what was going on at that time. And it was a track that promised to be special at a time when John Lennon said that we were one of the bands that he was listening to. So that was 1973, a very long time ago, but it's clear in my memory that it's something that John Lennon said, that he was interested in what we were doing at that time. And so for me, it marks that point where I think, for me, it's my favorite Genesis album, and there have been a lot of great albums from the band. I was happy to work on, I think, maybe it's 6 or 7 albums. It might even be 8 that I did with the band. There's also some live ones as well, of course. There's Genesis Live, Seconds Out, various live albums that have been released, some of which have been, way after the date, But Selling England is always a favorite for me, and we've just toured it in 7 weeks of traveling throughout Europe and Scandinavia. We did about 18 countries, and it's gone down a storm all over again doing that album, so I'm very proud of it.
And, I read that it was during kind of a difficult period personally for you, that you were going through a divorce. So, I wondered, maybe, and I know Genesis certainly had their ups and downs as far as, you guys getting along and just the pressures from record companies to put out new material. I'm wondering if the music maybe overshadows some of the personal things that were going on with you at the time, or if that's something that's so far gone, it's not even on your radar.
Well, my memory is that we were touring the States for the first time, and whilst my marriage was extremely rocky, shaky at that time, nonetheless, at that time I felt very at home on stage, because that was the time when I would get away from personal problems. I'd be on stage doing what I was meant to do, and by the time it was Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, then my first marriage had broken up by then. But I just remember that everything was going into the music. The music was everything that a personal life should have been, and wasn't. But the music was magic, so that was intact, and that was important to me.
Is it true you were rehearsing in a house and you were getting noise complaints from the neighbors? This is all kind of stuff of legend,
yeah.
But
I think with Genesis we were famous for rehearsing in unlikely places. For some reason, we never orientated towards, or we rarely orientated towards rehearsal rooms. It was always someone's house or a cowshed somewhere, or it was eccentric in the extreme. And then Lamb Lies Down was recorded. Initially, we were going to do it at Headley Grange, where Led Zeppelin had recorded, and we just ran out of time there, and we ended up recording with the Stones Mobile in a place in Wales. But that was another house that was absolutely falling apart, and so I thought, well, once again, great, here we are. It's like we've escaped from the rats that are running amok at Headley, and now we're into a place that's being rebuilt, and it's just, there's a few floorboards, and here we are again, camping out.
Well, that's, and also, again, some of the piece, the theme itself, Selling England by the Pound, it kind of speaks to, I guess, the Americanization of the music industry over in England, and this was a way of you guys maybe trying to take back or at least present English music in a way that was palatable to the American public, or am I just reading into this completely wrong?
Well, it was a title that Peter Gabriel came up with, and the first track included that line from it, selling England by the pound, but we were always anxious not to actually name the album as one track because it would draw a lot of attention to that one track. Magnificent though that track is, I think, Dancing with the Moonlit Night is the name of that track, and I think it's something that he took from the Labour Party manifesto, and I think, I can only guess at this, but I think it was to do with the idea of conglomerates taking over. Whereas in England, there was this idea, the romantic idea of the corner shop and the tea house and all this kind of stuff, and that was rapidly changing. So I think that's what Pete had in mind with that. But it certainly meant that we were selling all things English and largely touring in America at that time. So the fact that we put the English stamp on it, I don't think there was any anti-American feeling on it. Far from it. I was just very pleased that the album was that strong, and that the lyrics were often ambiguous, especially if they came from Peter Gabriel. And we had our first hit single from that album, a track called "I Know What I Like."
Yeah, that's a song you've done for years, and even Genesis was doing it after you left the band as well. Have you ever, I think I've asked you this before, but I know Daryl Sturmer took over for you and Anthony Phillips was before you, but did you ever hear Daryl's approach on that solo on "I Know What I Like" or any of your other material? Because very different style,
Yes, I did. I heard what Daryl did with not only that one, but also an entire set and the famous the fifth solo, and he did it very well. He did it very differently to me. I saw it as a long, unbroken melodic line, very legato, all of that. Whereas I think that when he was given a solo of that length, he tended to show his chops, show what he could do. So he would, play fast on that stuff. I guess it's all sort of evened out with time, some solos that I do stress the speed factor, and indeed when I do I know What I Like, that one, we go into a shuffle in the middle of it, which takes off like a rocket. It's a great fun moment for the band. It's the point where we all get really, really loose, and we're kind of off the map, but we're not doing the record at that moment. We just want to give it the all-out energy that I think it always deserved, and for me, the band I'm currently with does.
Sounds like I lost him. Hello?
Hello, hi Tom, how you doing? Sorry, I don't know what happened there, we got cut off.
Yeah, no worries. You're calling from England, so you never know what's going to happen. I guess
That's right, that's for sure.
I'll move on to a couple others because I'll give maybe a couple more questions and everything like that.
Sure thing.
I did want to talk about, of course, Spectrum Warnings. Actually, before we do that, I did have a Phil Collins question, because I know that on Selling England by the Pound, it was only really the second time that Phil had done lead vocals. And I know the story is that by the time Peter left, that you guys were auditioning new singers, and then eventually you decided on Phil as the lead singer. And I'm wondering if, with Phil having already done 2 tracks doing lead vocals on them, why wasn't he just originally considered as the lead vocalist right after Pete left, since he was already singing for you?
Well, I suggested that to Tony and Mike, and they were saying to me they didn't think that singing drummers looked any good on stage. And then I remember being at Phil's first wedding, and Jon Anderson was there, and I was meeting him for the first time. And he said to me, why don't you make why don't you make Phil the singer, because he's got a really good voice, and then why don't you get another instrumentalist to cover that? And I said, well, I think you're absolutely right, but so far the others have turned my idea down. Now, we did actually go through the whole hog, and we were auditioning other people, and I believe we actually auditioned the guy who became the singer of Rainbow. But at that time, it was, I guess what was staring us in the face was the fact that Phil was always going to be the best bet. He was from the band, he was amongst the ranks, and when the idea came up of getting in Bill Bruford, who was a star in his own right, that was always going to give us the level of sanction that we needed, which said, yeah, this is a band and a force to be reckoned with. And I very much enjoyed working with him, with Phil on vocals, and Phil running backwards and forwards to do the Phil and Bill show with double drum kits, and then with Chester Thompson a year later. It worked out incredibly well. So luckily, funnily enough, the first thing I ever wrote for Genesis was a track that Phil sang, and so I was already an early convert to Phil's abilities as regards that. And it all seems so obvious now, doesn't it? And but sometimes these things have to be thought through.
Well, I guess it kind of makes sense. I could see the whole, singer as a drummer thing, but I didn't realize that Jon Anderson was the one that suggested that, and certainly Jon is one of my favorite singers of all time.
He did suggest it, and the suggestion made no difference. But as I say, we started recording with someone else, and Phil really didn't like the sound of what the other guy had done with it, and said, look, let me have a go at this. And the first track that he sang was Squonk. To my recollection, it was Squonk, and he was already sounding very good. Tony Stratton-Smith happened to come by just as that was going down and said, oh, this sounds really great. Looks like you found your singer, guys. Oh, I'm off. He didn't hang around for any conjecture. And, of course, he was absolutely right. Phil was marvelous. The guy was supremely professional, always hit his marks, and so it was really, really good for us that we had someone within the band who already had an incredible voice that was a similar size and similarly compelling as Pete's.
So let's shift gears a little bit to Spectral Mornings. As I kind of touched on before, the first time I ever saw you in concert, it was back in 1981 in Rochester, New York, at a place called the Triangle Theater. You were on the tour for Cured, I believe, and I think at that point you were still doing a lot of Spectral Mornings material, a lot from Cured, but you really weren't doing much from Genesis. I think there was maybe one song, and for the life of me, I can't remember which one it was. I want to say Horizons. But at what point did you, Spectral Mornings is obviously a very important solo album for you. Was that kind of a time where you were really just singularly focused on, people obviously knew you from Genesis at that point, but was it more important for you to kind of make sure that the solo material was at the forefront and not getting kind of stuck in the back?
I think that it takes a while to establish identity if you've been part of a band that was that important. And but I loved the sound of Spectral Mornings. I loved the fact that we had our own vocal sound, the harmony sound that was so much a part of that, and that we touched on world music with it. Very early days of that, using the Chinese koto, and so that was very important to me. And it was my first touring band, So for all those reasons, I have great affection for that album. It was marvelous doing it then, and it's all about it doing it now with the kind of show that we're able to put on, with lights and everything, and all the guys that are in the band who are so extraordinary at not only doing a great job of the Genesis stuff, but also the solo stuff. So I'm still really, really fond of that. Sometimes I catch this stuff on YouTube and I go, wow, this is really, really good.
Yeah, I interviewed you once before a long time ago. As I said, there's a lot of stuff of yours that I absolutely love. I think my favorite live recording was the Tokyo tapes that you did with John Wetton. But it amazes me how compatible the older material is with the new material, even though the new material definitely sounds fresh. It doesn't sound like you're steeped in your past, but you seem to have that happy balance between carving out your own identity, but still paying homage to an incredible time in Genesis, which was very important for Genesis and for Peter Gabriel and for Phil and for you and for Mike. You guys were all at your creative youth peaks, if you will.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of that stuff we did together has really stood the test of time. So much of it has been re-released, and there's been a remaster of Seconds Out, for instance, a half-speed mastering process of that onto vinyl, and that's selling like crazy all over again. And I've just been signing so many copies of that. Ironically, of course, it was the album when I left the band at that time, but that was because I felt I needed to develop as a writer, and it was not always easy within Genesis, where there were so many strong writers and dominating personalities. All over again, that stuff, it just comes back and it comes back again. So I'm hugely proud of it, and I love doing these two favorite albums, that Genesis one, which is my personal favorite, and the other one is my personal favorite from the 70s, my solo one, Spectral Mornings. But then there's also, we do stuff live from At the Edge of Light, the latest album, which went in the charts in 12 different countries. So it was flying high there, and there's been great acceptance of the new stuff. So I've got ancient Genesis stuff, I've got ancient solo stuff, and I've got modern me stuff now. And I try and honor all of those separate periods.
Yeah, and that's tough because, a lot of these bands, they go out and they're expected to just sort of be organ grinders, pumping out the old hits and everything. But I think that you've managed to, as I said, get the best of both worlds, and you're still putting out new material. And, right before we spoke today, you're telling me you're still recording new stuff. So it's incredible.
It's a little bit like, I think, Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, where if they do the hits, what you think of is, they're going to do the album in its entirety. Those bands were albums bands, and I think that Genesis was very much cast in that mold when it started out. It was known for albums. There were occasional hit singles, but and then it became, I think, a singles orientated thing, obviously with the blessing of MTV and all the rest. And of course I benefited from that myself with GTR. We had MTV and hit album and single from that, and that was great to have. But I tend to think that you have people who are capable of doing great albums, and if they suddenly start doing a collection of hit singles which masquerades as an album, I think that fans notice that, and I think those albums sell less well in the long term, whereas the absolute classics, that line up with the bands that I'm talking about, I think that Genesis is perhaps, yet to acknowledge, just how important a lot of that stuff was. It's a strange thing. There's so much emphasis on the singles and the Phil period, but before all that, some people are surprised to hear that Peter Gabriel was the lead singer of the band, but depends how far back you go with that stuff. The band was great in all its incarnations, but I think that I've also had great bands, great associations myself after that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I forgotten about GTR. I just saw Steve Haw the other night. He still sounded great, but that was certainly a project that was sort of uncharacteristic of the stuff that you've done before and after, but certainly some stuff to be very proud of in that project as well.
Yeah, we had a great time making that, and Arista Records did a great job on it. Clive Davis did a great job. It was a very interesting time, I think, where we just about scraped in at that point. I think that, had we been a year or two older, it would have been, nobody over 35 gets a hit single. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, I remember that, I remember ACT saying to me, whoa, I turned 35, now they won't sign me, especially ACTs in the States. And, just before the era of people having their own labels and going, well, okay, so maybe you're not going to get bankrolled, but maybe you can, have your own studio, release the stuff yourself, and perhaps you have to self-fund or self-produce once again, and to prove your viability, because it is an industry that, although it's full of magic, it has its tragedies, and you've got to be resilient. You've got to be able to ride that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time out.
Lovely talking to you again.
To chat with you, and looking forward to having you come back to North Tonawanda. Can't wait to see the show. Your band.
Looking forward to that again. North Tonawanda, great gig.
Yeah, they love you there, man. I'll tell you, and your current band is just amazing. I don't know. They're just a great bunch of guys, and I'm sure you don't need to hear that, but I know a lot of times we've talked. This whole interview we've talked about a lot of other things, but certainly your current band deserves a lot of respect as well. They just approach this material with such vigor and such incredible musicianship. It's great.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I really believe that they are an extraordinary band, and they're capable of doing this and mountains more of stuff. So I'm hoping to work with them in the future. With stuff. As I say, I've just started new material, but it's been great talking.
All
and
right,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Have a great rest of your day.
All the best.
All right.
Thank you. Happy 4th.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so once again, I want to thank you for tuning in to the Night and Day podcast. And this particular interview with Steve Hackett will try to be a little bit more consistent as far as putting up these episodes, but I know that I have a few listeners out there, and anybody that takes the time to listen to this show, you prog rock fans in particular, I certainly appreciate it. And until next time, this is Thom Jennings saying, enjoy good friends, good music, and good times. Thanks so much.